Welcome, and thank you for joining today's Moving to Work Cohort Number 1 webinar. Please note that all participant lines will be muted until the Q&A portion of the call. We will provide you with instructions on how to ask a verbal question at that time. You are welcome to submit written questions during the presentation, and these will be addressed during Q&A. To send a note, select all panelists on the Send To drop-down menu of the chat panel located on the lower right-hand side of your screen. If you require technical assistance, send a note to the event producer or call our help desk at 888-796-6118. With that, I'll turn the call over to Marianne Nazaro, Director, MTW Demonstration Program. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Excuse me. This is Marianne Nazaro. I obviously have lost my voice, so I'm not going to be doing too much talking today. With me today is John Concannon, the Deputy Director of the Moving to Work demonstration. We just are so excited to be here with you today. We're really thrilled that Congress chose to expand MTW demonstration, and I'm actually going to turn it over to John because my voice is a little bit worse than I thought it was going to be. John?
Thanks, Marianne. Made it through half a slide. That's great. Hi, everyone. This is John Concannon. I'm just going to review the logistics for today, but really excited just to walk through, we see as a really exciting opportunity for housing authorities. We've heard clamoring from industry and non-MTW housing authorities for years just to open up the program, expand it, and finally we have this opportunity to bring on 100 new MTW housing authorities. But just quickly, the logistics for today, we're going to have two question and answer sessions, one about halfway through and one at the end of the call. You can ask questions. Our operator will go through kind of the process to ask them on the phone, or you can submit them in the chat feature of the Skype. Our slides are available and will be posted along with on our website. At any time after the call, feel free to email us at mtw-info@hud.gov, and we've also been keeping the MTW webpage up to date pretty regularly. But Marianne and I introduced ourselves, but we're really fortunate to be joining us Len Williams. He's the CEO of the Housing Authority of Columbus, Georgia. Welcome, Len. And Aaron Kreuzberg, the MTW and Federal Policy Director at Boulder Housing Partners. So they're going to be providing sort of a perspective. We believe it's one thing to hear how MTW works from HUD, and I think it's another to hear it from your peers at housing authorities. And these are housing authorities obviously in different parts of the country, different sized agencies, different markets. And so we think we're really looking forward to them sharing their perspectives on what is working and what they've tested and maybe what hasn't worked using their MTW authority. But really the overview today, we want to go through just sort of the purpose of, this Cohort 1, and we're going to walk through what are the benefits to your agency, and then lastly, how you can become an MTW agency, and we're going to have that application process, kind of we'll walk through that. So that's our plan for today. But we'd really, this purpose, which I just touched upon, is to learn about the program and its benefits, answer questions from all of you, and provide an overview of the structure of the framework of the program, which is, we think, a simplified, streamlined version. And we'll get into that in more depth a little bit later. But first, we know there are people with varying levels of expertise in the MTW program. And so we just wanted to provide a brief background on its history, sort of at a high level, and then we'll kind of narrow down into program specifics and issues and specifics that might be facing your housing authority. But Moving to Work is a demonstration program. It was enacted in 1996. We frequently get questions about why are we called Moving to Work? We're not a purely a self-sufficiency program, but this sort of was born out of welfare reform in the late 90s when we had welfare to work and you name it, everything was work-related. But so often housing authorities at our MTW plus our office, we do get a lot of calls about, gaining individual grants for households. But as we all know, it's really providing flexibility to housing authorities. There are currently 39 MTW housing authorities representing both small and large housing authorities in urban and rural areas. In 2017, just to give you a sense of perspective, these PHAs received over $4 billion in federal housing assistance, about 17% of our inventory, and they represent about 14% of the nation's public housing stock. So these are oftentimes larger agencies, so we've heard from these 39 agencies in the Hill and saying let's invert the model and start working with agencies that aren't quite as large. But what is MTW? It offers housing authorities, really provides tools to design and test innovative, locally designed housing and self-sufficiency strategies. We know that there are challenges in operating the public housing program and the voucher program within strict confines of the regs. And it really depends on your market. So we believe that MTW provides you the tools to waive a reg or even some statutory requirements to address whatever your housing needs are. But it's giving you flexibility to design and test these approaches in a more cost-effective way as well. Saving your dollars to reallocate it to whatever your need is at the agency. And as I mentioned before, exceptions to public housing and voucher rules. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, it enables housing authorities to use their public housing and HCV funds flexibly. So those are your three funding streams on the voucher side, plus the public housing capital and public housing operating funds.
I can't.
Mary Ann was going to say,
I can't.
We're drinking plenty of tea, and hopefully she'll be fine in a few minutes here. But just a little bit more background. This is written into the original statute in 1996. There are three objectives built into the MTW program. To reduce costs and achieve greater cost effectiveness using your federal dollars, to provide incentives to families to find employment and become self-sufficient, and housing choice, to increase housing choices for low-income families. And I think as Len and Karen will be able to explain, when developing MTW policies, it really has to tie to at least one of these objectives, which frankly is fairly easy to do with the programs that we run to touch upon one of these. But it's one or more of these objectives they have to tie into. Now, we have this slide around use of MTW flexibilities, and this is just really a small sampling. If you really want to delve into what MTW housing authority is doing in your jurisdiction, we also would invite you to visit the MTW website. We have our called that participating sites page. We have all of our housing authorities listed there with all of their plans. So you could, click into whatever it may be, Philadelphia or Boulder or Columbus, Georgia, or Seattle, wherever it may be, if you really want to get a full understanding of what agencies are doing at a pretty detailed level. But just some examples of these flexibilities built into these three objectives, these buckets, around using MTW funds to leverage funds. We see a lot of development taking place within MTW housing authorities. This could include RAD. We've had about 75% roughly of MTW housing authorities that have applied to or are converting to RAD. And we think one reason for that high number is because there's that much more flexibility for MTW agents to actually fill gaps that may exist and to make sure that these deals pencil out. MTW funds can be used to fill development gaps for public housing developments, or even if you're developing a LIHTC property. And I think one of our presenters here is going to go over the RAD program a bit as well in more detail. Around self-sufficiency, we see a lot of housing authorities that are trying innovative things, but they're tying those together with supportive services just to really ensure the success of families, either to transition off of the program or the transition into, either to find employment or education, whatever it may be. But it's using funds that perhaps you had more tighter confines on to work with supportive services and to really to partner with agencies in their jurisdictions. Also in self-sufficiency, it's included here, we have some, you can eliminate your earned income, or you can build in these earned income exclusions as well, and eliminate deductions, things such as that. And around housing choice, the second one down about landlord incentive programs. We know that nationally we've seen numbers of Section 8 landlords trending down. Our PD&R colleagues just published something recently showing that. And so MTW housing authorities have just more ability to work with landlords to say what are the issues and to develop areas that combat and actually, either incentivize new landlords to join the program. We've seen agencies that will provide, say, 1 month of HAP to new landlords, or landlords that agree to continue to at turnover to rent to another Section 8 voucher holder. We've seen MTW housing authorities create damage funds for fears of landlords seeing damages to their properties. So there's just a lot of flexibility you have there in working with landlords, and because they're invaluable to keeping this partnership alive. So we'll kind of cover more examples later on, but we just wanted to give you a little bit of flavor, and please feel free once we come to question and answer to ask if your agency could do any specific sort of activity. On this next slide, we just include this just to show. I think we've heard from non-MTW housing authorities out there saying what's happening in the world of MTW, and there's a lot that's been learned from MTW housing authorities, and sometimes we're not the best at saying this is where we learned it. But for instance, the streamlining rule, these were all things that MTW housing authorities were doing, and really HOPMA. It was part of the reason I think HOPMA was passed was because we could prove that these things were successful, and they had been taking place for years at MTW housing authorities. So there's a lot of good work that's happening, and because the goal really of this program is not just to provide select housing authorities with this flexibility, it's really to allow these housing authorities to test these locally designed policies so that we can then roll them out to the 3,000 plus other housing authorities across the country, just to figure out what's working and what isn't. And on this next slide, we have our map. And you can see the distribution of MTW housing authorities currently. One piece of the statute expanding the program speaks to geographic diversity, because we realize we do have clusters of housing authorities on the coast, so we're going to speak to that a little bit later. But with that, we kind of wanted to bring in Karen and Len to, as you see, they're much different parts of the country and represent different perspectives on MTW, and so we really want to turn it over to you, Karen, just to walk us through kind of how you've used MTW authority at Boulder.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Marianne and Don, for inviting me to participate today. I would love to start off to just say that MTW is my favorite thing. Let's be clear, okay? So my name is Karen Kreitzberg, and I am the MTW and Federal Policy Director for Boulder Housing Partners. We are located in Boulder, Colorado, which is about 20 miles northwest of Denver. Since 2012, BHP has had the pleasure of participating in the Moving to Work program. We have found some creative solutions to the rules and regulations that, honestly, we don't necessarily care for. We have made the program easier for our residents and our participants, along with our community and our staff. Some of the things that we have done is we've changed the way we calculate income and rent for our work-able families. We also recertify these families once every 2 years and only allow for interim decreases under really specific certain circumstances. From 2014 to 2018, we have seen the increase in income be at 84% for this core group of work-able families. Now, granted, we may not be able to take full credit for that 84% increase, but we do believe that our MTW activity does have an impact on that increase. There's obviously been some other issues around that, other factors involved as well, but that's something that I think is really, really exciting. Another way that we've used MTW is we've leveraged funds to help purchase local non-traditional affordable housing units here in the Boulder area that some of the development deals or some of the acquisition deals that we've entered into, we would not have been able to do had we not been able to use that extra money to actually get us over the hump to actually purchasing those units. We have also leveraged housing dollars to provide services to domestic violence survivors and the chronically homeless through our partners. It's really exciting when we can show up with the actual housing assistance dollars and our partners can show up with the supportive services, and it just creates a really great successful program that we can then, better serve our local community. As John mentioned, the name is quite confusing, Moving to Work. A lot of our participants when we first came on are elderly and disabled, and the elderly are like, well, wait a minute, I've already done my time working. I'm retired. I don't want to go back to work. Some of the agencies have chosen to change the name. Here at BHP, we decided not to do that. We just say that this is how we do business now. One of the aspects of the program that we did not fully embrace or realize when we applied for MTW designation was the fact that we are now the policymakers, and that means that we are now the ones who have to answer to our participants and residents when they don't like the policy we've created. We don't get to hide behind the fact that, oh, well, that's a HUD rule, and while we agree with you, we are the administrator of the program, and unfortunately we're just doing our job. No, we kind of have to figure out that, oh, now we've made that choice, we've made that rule. However, all of that being said, MTW is a power tool in the toolbox for housing authorities to creatively solve local issues and create more affordable housing, which is such a huge issue in so many of our communities nationwide. It's not the answer to every issue, but I find it very exciting. It is what gets me out of bed and into work every day. I love my job. MTW provides a lot of power. In the words of Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And on that great note, I'm going to pass it off to Len Williams from the Housing Authority of Columbus, Georgia.
Thank you, Karen. It's good to be with you this afternoon. I am from Columbus, Georgia. We're about an hour and a half southwest of Atlanta. We have about 5,400 units in our total portfolio, and about 2,300 units are under management by us. As you saw from the PowerPoint presentation, we joined the program in 2012, and FY 2013 was our first full year in the program. We've used both regulatory waivers and fungibility as allowed by the program. And our original plan included 3 programmatic activities as well as several administrative activities. So I'm going to quickly walk you through those. One of our first programmatic activities was reducing homelessness, and we had a special emphasis on reducing homelessness among veterans. Columbus is the home of Fort Benning, so the veteran homeless population is substantial here. So we provided 150 vouchers that were to be used as rapid rehousing vouchers. We worked with VA and got 40 additional VASH vouchers, and then we worked closely with the local Home for Good, is called the local nonprofit agency that coordinates the city's efforts to end homelessness. Our participation with the MTW program allowed Home for Good to obtain $1.5 million in funding from a local philanthropist. so we were immediately able to leverage the program. Results to date, we have housed 176 chronically homeless veterans, and that is a 92% decrease. We have actually reached functional zero in veteran homelessness. We also have housed 209 chronically homeless families and individuals, and that's a decrease of 39%. So we feel that that program has been very successful so far. Our second programmatic activity was a choice mobility program, and we implemented that to determine the employment, educational, and health benefits of moving families to high opportunity areas. So we issued 40 vouchers to families at 120% of fair market rents, and they could be used anywhere in Columbus. For a second group of 40 families, they received vouchers that could only be used in high opportunity areas, and those were also 120% of fair market rent. And then we selected a control group of regular voucher holders that we used for study purposes. And as of FY 2017, the location restricted group had increased employment by 53%, and the control group had experienced a 14% increase. And interestingly enough, the non-restricted 120% fair market rent voucher holders did not gain in employment. And for a final report to take in the 2018 information. Our third programmatic activity was at Farley Homes. We implemented a rent reform activity. In order to encourage residents to become employed, we gradually increased the minimum rent, but we also restructured the rent calculation for newly employed residents. The calculation percentage was reset to 25% and then was increased back to 30% over 5 years. To date, the head of household employment has increased from a baseline of 11% to 72% in 2017. And over the same time period, average rents have increased by 91%. We also did some administrative initiatives. We excluded assets less than $50,000 from annual income calculations. We went to triennial recertification for elderly and disabled, biannual HQS inspections for well-maintained properties. We exclude child support income from rent calculation. We cap child care deductions. And our favorite is we restricted voucher portability to employment-related reasons, and that's been very popular with the staff, the voucher staff. But, of course, in addition to these waiver-related activities, they mentioned earlier the fungibility, and that has been huge. We are transitioning our entire public housing portfolio to the RAD program, and we're modernizing our existing housing stock with tax credit funding, and that just would not be possible without fungibility. We use a portion of our voucher funding along with CFP and public housing reserves to provide gap funding. And as I said, we couldn't do that without this flexibility. I've been in the housing and community development business for 43 years, going back to the CDBG program, Urban Development Action Grants. We've done Hope 6 grants. We've done multiple 9% tax credit, redevelopment, 4% modernization with RAD. We manage RAD properties and fixed income, project-based rental assistance, permanent supportive housing, home units, market rate, affordable market rate properties, and 4 other housing authorities. And I mention that just to let you know that, unfortunately, I'm old and have been around a while. But I want to tell you that joining the Moving to Work program was the best decision of my career and will have the most positive impact on our housing authority going forward. I would advise you to get in the program as soon as you can. It will totally change the way you do business and it'll change the way you think about providing services to your residents. That's really all I have.
Thank you very much. I think we might need to cut a commercial after that. Thank you for those your words of what's been working in Boulder and in Columbus. I think we've heard that there are much different issues. Columbus is dealing with veteran homelessness, and you've been able to target your resources there. So I really, thanks for sharing that sort of in detail on what's working there. And one thing that you all touched upon is, I think you've seen that sometimes your MTW initiatives may not be as successful as you intended for them to be. And I would say, just for all of those housing authorities interested in MTW, there aren't any punitive measures that HUD has for if you say don't set out and meet your goal, because we're always able to come back and put our heads together and restructure whatever the initiative may be. So I think we've heard really what are definitely benefits of MTW. Really, these two agencies are really leaders in the field, and using this flexibility to waive certain statutory and regulatory barriers in their local communities. Now, on this last bullet on this, how can MTW benefit your agency, I think Karen mentioned that sort of an MTW term of art is this local non-traditional housing program. MTW housing authorities can create a local housing program that is outside of Section 8 and outside of Section 9, the public housing program. And what we call that is the local non-traditional housing program. We have a notice around it. It's 2011-45. But what it really, it's providing an extra level of flexibility to think and address problems that may exist in communities. For example, we've seen communities that don't have an emergency housing component, and so they've used their voucher funding to create an emergency housing option to really have a continuum of services in their area. But oftentimes it's around development and things like that as well. So I just wanted to explain that term. But with sort of that first half of background and what we've heard there, we really wanted to open it up for questions. So I'll turn it over to our moderator, Marvin. If you could open it up for questions, Marvin.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, as we move to Q&A, please feel free to place yourself into the question queue by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question. To send a written question, select all panelists on the Send To drop-down menu of the chat panel located on the lower right-hand side of your screen. And it looks like we do have a verbal question here. I'll go to that line. Caller, your line is unmuted. And please be sure that your device is also unmuted. Okay, and I believe that caller has disconnected with us, so I will go to the written questions that we've received. Again, in the meantime, that's #2 if you do have a verbal question. So our first question is, will the application process used in Cohort 1 be similar in the other cohorts? E.g., will there be a lottery? Will the required application materials be similar? Will the application period be open the same length of time?
Well, the evaluation method determines the application process. So we're actually in the process of trying to finalize that notice for the second cohort, bringing those agencies on, and we hope to publish that soon. And that will spell out that process. We can't speak to it totally in depth just because it is technically a competition. But it will really be informed by the evaluation process. And I see we have a...
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
The next question is, what strategies would you all recommend for partnering with nonprofit entities?
Karen or Len, would you like to answer that from your perspectives? I'm happy to say something too.
So this is Karen from Boulder, and I think our partners here in our local community we're a very service-rich community, and so we have a lot of agencies who are providing services. It's always the housing piece that doesn't seem to line up, or it's more a lottery luck of the draw when you get a voucher. And so when you have the ability to move forward and say, I can take this housing resource and pair it with this service, it's so much easier, right? And then we always make sure that we have the proper agreements in place, like a memorandum of understanding of who's doing what and agreement for services, all of that type of thing. But it's definitely very attractive when we can come forth with the housing resource and our partners can meet us halfway with the supportive services to make sure that people get housed and stay housed.
And I would agree with that. We have a very service-rich environment as well. We have been very intentional in making our mission providing housing, because that's what we do well, and brokering with other services to provide those things that they do well. And we probably have developed relationships with 35 or 40 social service providers in the community, as well as businesses. And we find that model works really well.
Thank you both. I can read the
next question. Oh,
go ahead, Margaret.
All right. We are a HCV-only housing authority. What other funds could we use?
Well, we'll first say probably the most common question we've received so far around applying to the expansion is, we are a Section 8 only housing authority, or we are a public housing only housing authority. Are we eligible to apply to the program? And we'd first say yes, you can apply. You're eligible to apply to the program. Now, in terms of fungibility, if you're a voucher program only, you only have your voucher funds and your admin fees, but you still have the full flexibilities within MTW, and we'll touch on that in the second half of this presentation. MTW waivers that we've published, but you still have the full waiver authority within the voucher program, and so that could be anything ranging from adjusting inspection schedules, changing rents for households. If you are looking to create some sort of time limit or work requirement. But there are a lot of flexibilities that you can apply within the voucher program, but you would just have that main funding stream.
Okay. To the agencies that are currently participating, what is involved to complete the impact analysis?
That's a great question. That is spelled out in our operations notice. We developed this operations notice that was published, and you can access it on the MTW website. But we're kind of developing guidance in addition to that that will spell out what should go in an impact analysis. And for those of you that may not know what this is really you can do some really creative things under MTW and other things such as, like I mentioned before, a time limit. But if you're doing a time limit, we've heard from various stakeholders in developing this program, we really want to ensure that it's fully thought through and vetted in the community. And so this impact analysis is just looking at the impact to your residents and your community, and ensuring that the proper, you've looked at it and it makes sure it will be successful, and that residents are fully aware of it. And because we're not looking to offer any, undue harm for families that are served. Karen or Len, I don't know if you want to provide an example of an impact policy, if anything comes to mind.
I'd love to share. When we originally did one of our very first activities was a rent reform for our elderly and disabled folks, and one of the things that we did is we removed all medical allowances and deductions. And it was, we had to take our current group of people, we had to figure out what would the impact be if we did this for our families, for our elderly and disabled families. What would the impact be on their portion of the rent? What would the impact be on the program? And then we also we implemented a hardship policy because we found that we wanted to make sure that we weren't overly harming too many folks, and yet we wanted to make sure that our housing dollars were really being spent on housing and not trying to fix the broken healthcare system. And our housing dollars are very, very limited, and we wanted to make sure that we were directing those directly towards housing. This is an area where now I can't blame HUD on their rent calculation. I have to stand behind the policy that we've created, which the impact analysis is not only a really great way to make sure that you're not impacting people or not impacting them too much or in a really harmful way, but it's also a really great strategy to use to figure out why exactly you're doing what you're doing and having those reasons for later on when people ask you, why are you doing this to us? Why are you taking away this piece of my benefit? If you can explain that internally, if you can answer that question, it's definitely helpful later on after you implement. And the impact analysis, if you involve your community, you involve everybody around you, all your service partners, you involve your local legal aid, you involve your residents and participants, you will get a really incredibly awesome new policy. It takes time, and it takes involvement and resources and energy, but it is really, really worth it.
Thank you, Karen.
And our next question, we are still not quite sure how MTW works. Our PHA has only HCV and is a very small PHA. May we request a sample of Boulder Housing Partners or the Housing Authority of Columbus, Georgia admin or policy plan regarding the benefits?
I'll say we don't require those to be submitted to HUD, but we do have the plans and MTW plans that are posted on our website. I don't know if your admin or ACOPs are available on your local website, Len or Karen.
For Boulder Housing Partners, our current admin plan is on our website. I'd also like to offer, if anybody would like to reach out after this webinar, you have questions, anything to do with, anything that you think that I can help you with, please don't hesitate to reach out. I am more than willing to talk MTW. You might have to cut me off because I like to get on my MTW soapbox, and I really like that place.
I would agree with Karen. I think the best way, in fact, would be to get on the phone with one of us and talk through some of these things. I think that'd be the best way to see how the flexibilities would transfer to your agency. And I would be glad to talk to anyone as well.
And I will add, we have our a contact list on the MTW website that shows the MTW policy contact if you wanted to talk to a PHA in your state or in your area of the country. But that's posted on the MTW website. Go for it, Marvin.
Yes. Looks like we have a couple more questions. How many employees do both of these PHAs have?
For Boulder Housing Partners, we have around 90 employees. We have currently 1,155 vouchers. We have only 49 units of public housing left. We have over 1,300 other type of units between tax credits, market rate properties, local affordable units. In my Housing for Choice voucher team, we're a team of 7. And then we have one property manager on the remaining 49 MTW units.
and we have right at 150 employees.
And I think this next question will be our last, and then we'll move on to the talking more about the expansion.
Okay. Our environment assessments / environmental reviews and NOIRRF / NSI notices and other building site specifics able to be waived while using MTW funds?
Unfortunately, no.
That's correct. Yeah, unfortunately, we aren't able to waive Part 50, Part 58 reviews and environmental reviews. So thank you for those questions. Those are great, and we're going to have another opportunity at the end of the presentation to answer any more questions, too. But now, while you're sort of all here, finally, I'm sure we're waiting to talk about this expansion. In 2016, Congress authorized HUD to add 100 more agencies. Now, we're required to bring on new agencies by testing a specific policy change and bring on agencies within a cohort. Right now, we're looking at about 4 cohorts. And also, built into this language was a requirement for HUD to form an advisory committee to inform the Secretary on what changes PHA should be testing and implementing. It's really a great opportunity to inform, all the work that's done in low-income housing. So we have a real opportunity here in using MTW as that vehicle. But we have 7 years to bring on these 100 agencies. PHAs must be high performers. They must be a high performer in either FOS or CMAP. Those of you who may have looked at the program in previous application periods, you had to have both programs, public housing and Section 8, and you had to be a high performer in both programs. So this is a big change. And as we referenced before, the program has to represent geographic diversity. So ensuring that parts of the country that, or parts of even a state that may not have MTW Housing Authority has that ability to apply. Now, there were specific size requirements, and you may say, these aren't typical buckets of size groupings we typically see from REAC or HUD, but this came directly from Congress that for the new 100 agencies, at least 50 of them have to be 1,000 or fewer units, public housing and vouchers combined. At least 47 have to be between 1,001 and 6,000 units, and no more than 3 shall be between 6,001 and 27,000 units. And we'll also be looking at, we must bring on 5 PHAs that are undergoing portfolio-wide RAD conversions. And there's also a provision in there for creating a regional MTW housing authority. We're kind of not going to get into that in detail today, but that's look for a sort of a separate notice on that in the future. Now, the 4 cohorts that we, at the advice of this advisory committee, and this advisory committee consisted of, and still consists, it's still up and active, 5 housing authority executive directors, 5 academic researchers from institutions around the country, 2 2 HUD staff, our General Deputy Assistant Secretary for PD&R, Todd Richardson, and Marianne Nazaro, the MTW Director. And we had 3 public housing residents as well. So those, with that committee, with range of perspectives, come together to recommend these 4 cohort policies to test. The first is, and this is what the application period that's currently open right now, is around MTW flexibility kind of writ large. And that's allowing housing authorities to test whatever they may want to waive, within the bounds of the waivers, but they are able to really set their direction. Now, our research method is to randomly select up to 30 housing authorities and compare those to PHAs that were not selected. Now, we've heard from interested housing authorities saying, well, what if I'm not selected? What will the burden be on my housing authority? And we would say it's minimal. We've worked with PD&R, and we've heard this, an estimate between 3 and 8 hours over a 5-year period. So we think it's pretty minimal commitment.
So, yeah, this is Elizabeth from the Office of Policy Development and Research. I just wanted to add that engagement in the evaluation would be maybe answering a short survey once or twice and having some key staff give interviews to the research team. And the information gathered would be just about the policies at your PHA, and one of the things we would be trying to find out is if a PHA that does not have MTW authority was able to figure out some way to pursue its goals anyway, despite that fact.
Thanks, Liz. The second cohort, which we hope to publish a PIH notice on, kind of this in early 2019, is around rent reform. And we're fleshing that out now, but there still will be discretion at the housing authority level to decide which sort of rent reform they wish to pursue. The third cohort will be around work requirements, either program-wide or at specific developments. And the fourth cohort will be around landlord incentives. Now, we will just say in cohort 2, it doesn't mean you can only do rent reform. There will be other MTW flexibilities provided, so we're trying to offer the full range of flexibilities to housing authorities. Now, the selection process, that was, I think, a questioner had asked, sort of referenced. It's for evaluating the overall flexibility of MTW on the PHA and on the residents it serves. As we mentioned, it's targeting PHAs with 1,000 or fewer aggregate units. Now, it's going to be a two-step selection process. The first step is open right now, and that's submitting a letter of interest to HUD. That's spelled out in Notice 2018-17, and we really heard this through the current administration. Make this as simple as possible to apply to MTW. Because we've heard, housing authorities perhaps being turned off by maybe not having a full range of, or not the capacity to engage in a contractor, perhaps. So we're just trying to make this as simple as possible. So letters of interest are due in January 11th. So just under a month. So that's why we're here. We're really encouraging everyone to apply. And the second step, so then we'll have, the second step involves a lottery. And so we will do a lottery to select those 30 housing authorities. And then those 30 housing authorities that are chosen will be invited to submit an application to obtain the MTW designation. And that application really spells out kind of what you intend to do using your MTW flexibility. Provide you with a few months to pull that together after we select through the lottery process, just to work with your community, engage with your residents, and to really have a deliberate, thoughtful approach. So I will say, Boulder and Georgia have been in this program for, 6-7 years. We don't expect everyone to hit the ground running, rolling out complex rent reform policies. Really, we're encouraging and we'll be providing plenty of training and technical assistance to new MTW housing authorities, but to really pursue a deliberate approach, because really to ratchet up MTW programs rather than just to to make sweeping change, because we know this affects families' lives, and we really want the housing authorities to do this really intentionally. Now, we have everything you may need on the Cohort #1 website. If you were to go to HUD.gov/MTW, on the right side, you'll see we have an expansion link. And if you click on that expansion link, you can then get to a Cohort 1. But we have a lot of information there. We have this notice to apply, 2018-17, which lays out the steps to apply. We have a frequently asked questions document, which we would encourage you to look at. Some of the questions we've even seen today, are on there. And if you have other questions that aren't addressed in that document or in the PIH notice, feel free to email us at mtw-info@hud.gov, and we'll be sure to get back to you. Or we're required to post all answers so everyone has the same level of information. So we would post a response to your question on that FAQ. We also have a link to a webcast on the MTW selection notice. If you're looking for something fun to watch over the holidays, it is up there. And we have a Microsoft Excel eligibility worksheet, in addition to links to a lot of attachments and forms and things. So anything you may need is there. Now, sort of on what's next, what can you expect in terms of a timeline? The application is out on the street right now. We expect to revise the MTW operations notice based on public comment and publish a final operations notice. I touched on that briefly, but the operations notice is really the framework for the program. We want to be sure that it's published and out there so that PHAs know what you're coming onto the program. We've structured it, those of you who have pursued RAD, as a PIH notice. We've done it this way so that way we can learn from what's happening and we can update the notice as necessary. But it's sort of for current MTW housing authorities, if we were to add a unique flexibility, we would have to do an amendment to a contract with the agency. It can be a cumbersome back and forth. The benefit to this operations notice approach is if we were to add a unique flexibility to say in one of our new agencies, the next time we update our operations notice, we could then add in this new waiver so that all MTW housing authorities have this option. So that's one of the main benefits. But that operations notice will be finalized this spring. This summer, possibly into the early fall, we'll designate the initial cohort of MTW agencies, and then we'll be inviting the second cohort of MTW agencies to apply. And then this winter, we'll designate that second cohort of MTW agencies. And so we have through 2022 to bring all agencies on. It's our goal to do it sooner than that, but that's sort of our overarching timeline. So again, Marvin will open up the phone for questions, but really, if there's anything I would say that the purpose of this call is to really show you that there is benefit to MTW, and if you don't think there's a benefit to your agency, then perhaps we haven't done a good enough job. So please ask any questions if there's a certain benefit you may not be seeing.
Okay, and once again, that's #2 on your telephone keypad if you do have a verbal question. We do have one in the phone queue at the moment, so I will go to that. Caller, your line is unmuted.
Hi there, this is Unison Housing Partners here in Adams County. What's up, Boulder? Good to hear from you. Hey, I had a question. So we're over 1,000 units, and if we want to throw our hat in the ring to get into the second cohort that will be designated at some point in the winter of 2020, does that mean we're required to submit by the 11th of January 2019, or does that mean that we wait for another request for submittals at a later date, either in 2019?
Yeah, that means you wait. Yeah, so this first cohort is just under 1,000 units, and that's where you're submitting the letters of interest. But once we publish the cohort 2 notice, then that's when you would submit your letter of interest.
Okay, and then
code 3 and 4, are those different times as well?
So would the final cohort 3 and cohort 4, would that be separate notices for submittal as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. They will be. All 4 cohorts will be solicited under separate PIH notices, and we're trying to spell out the requirements for the evaluation because they're just different for each cohort, which is at the direction of Congress.
Gotcha. And timing for cohorts 3 and 4 yet to be determined, or do you have a forecasted timeline on that as well?
So Marianne's whispering to me with her voice. Yeah, our plan is hopefully for
cohort 3
sometime in 19, and cohort 4 hopefully in 20.
Gotcha.
But,
gotcha.
I think the hard part was setting up this operations notice, this framework, working with this advisory committee, in the past couple of years. But now once we have this set, hopefully we're hoping to bring on these cohorts pretty quickly.
Advisory meeting for cohort 4.
Yeah, and if you're interested, we're going to be having this advisory committee. We're bringing it together in it's looking like March, and it will be published on our website to discuss cohort 4 if you want to learn more about what we're looking at.
Great. Well, thank you. This has been informative. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and we do have a couple of questions in the chat. Is the regionalization notice expected to be released in the next few months?
No, but we are working with an agency right now to potentially be the first regional MTW housing authority, because we're finding that there are just so many complexities to developing a regional MTW housing authority, such as is that just one ACC for several housing authorities, or is it just one reporting mechanism? Is it one board? And we've heard different approaches from different parts of the country. So we're starting with one group, and our hope is we've been saying in the MTW office to publish that notice in this federal fiscal year, 2019.
Next question is, if we were to put in the control group, would we be able to apply for MTW in the next year?
Yes, absolutely. If you're put in the control group, you are able to apply for cohorts 2, 3, or 4.
Will the PHA selected into the MTW expansion be required to work closely with any research teams?
There is a baseline survey for any housing authorities that have applied already that's submitted. But, I mean, working closely, you always have the benefit of working with us in the MTW office and your local field office. And I think there will be outreach from our policy office and perhaps contractors, but I don't see it as being a burden at all. And especially not for this first cohort, not for cohort number 1.
Are we responding to this question? Will they be selected?
That was the first question.
No.
There's a higher.
But that was a great question. Yeah.
All right. Will PHAs that apply to cohort 1 but are not selected to receive MTW designation be required to resubmit the same application information for other cohorts? Will there be a separate process for these PHAs?
Yeah, that process will be laid out in the future selection notices for cohorts 2, 3, and 4. I think a lot of it will likely be the same, but we can't say definitively because it is competition right now. Yeah, we don't expect you to have to recreate the wheel if you were to apply a second time. But it will be a different process.
How do we get geographical diversity when you selected through a lottery process?
Yeah, and this is where I wish Marianne didn't have her laryngitis. We've worked through this process, and if you look at our notice, I think we're going to have to do these lotteries. Is it by HUD region at first? Yeah.
It's spelled out in the note.
Yeah. It's spelled out in the selection notice. I don't know, Elizabeth.
The simple answer is that the lottery will happen in a couple of different regions. So that's how we make sure that we get treatment and control groups from different regions in the country.
Yeah. And we spell out those regions in the selection notice.
The first application is in January. Is the lottery not until summer of 2019?
No, it will be in the spring. I think then we would invite agencies to, and we would announce that, and then we'd invite those 30 agencies to put together those applications or MTW plans, and then we would announce in the summer. I think maybe that's where the summer is coming from.
Right, after the operations notice.
After the operations notice is finalized. But the final full designation will be made in summer. And the plan, again, hearing from the administration not to make something overly cumbersome for you all. We know you have programs to run right now. The plan is no more than 10 pages, and really is your plans for the future.
All right. We have a total of 1,153 HCV. Can we allocate some and not all to MTW?
Unfortunately,
Cohort 1, they're not eligible if they apply in the future.
Yeah. Sorry, Marianne speaking here. You would not be eligible for Cohort 1 just because we're looking at number of ACC units, so we would see 1153 and we wouldn't meet the eligibility criteria, but you would be eligible for a future cohort. And if it's sort of a question of even beyond that, if you wanted to apply MTW to certain buckets of vouchers, but certain flexibilities to say, we allow, say, rent reform, whatever it may be, to be applied to your work-able population, but not your elderly and disabled. So I don't think that's the question you're asking, but unfortunately, yeah, you would have to wait for the next.
Can housing authorities of under 1,000 wait to apply in cohort number 2?
Yes. Although, if you're interested in doing rent reform, you can do that in cohort number 1. So I would encourage you to apply into the first cohort. You could certainly wait. It's up to your housing authority. But if you're looking to do rent reform policies, you'll still have the ability to do those under cohort number 1. And it's probably the lightest touch evaluation.
Yeah, this is Elizabeth again from Policy Development and Research. And if you're eligible for Cohort 1 and you're interested in doing MTW, I would strongly recommend applying to the first cohort because with that cohort, you're going to get all the flexibilities. You're not going to be restricted in any way to do a certain policy that is being specifically tested. You just get to be flexible, and that means you could do whatever is best for your locality with, I think as John just mentioned, the lightest touch evaluation. So the evaluation for cohort 1 will, even for the treatment group, not be very burdensome at all. It will involve mostly using existing data that you have to produce anyway, and some interviews and some surveys. And so in a way, it's really the most attractive one if you are eligible for it.
Yeah. And I will add, you might be thinking, well, what are these rent reform policies? You can look at the operations notice on our website, and if you scroll all the way to the bottom to the appendix, we have, I think it's the first under waiver type 1, we have a lot of different examples of MTW activities you can do, such as adjusting minimum rent or eliminating deductions, or changing, going from 30% rent to 31% or something like that. We have a lot of, that may change slightly in the final notice, but I think that'll give you a good idea of the full complement of rent reform activities, plus a lot of other options that are out there. And I would also add, there's, in this operations notice, we have those specific activities listed out, kind of doing minimum rent between, certain bounds, and we allow definitely flexibility for housing authorities. But we have said, really, our goal is to have one MTW program. And so if you see a flexibility there that something you would like to pursue in your community, you can submit that here to headquarters, and we will review that. It's our aim to, as long as it's not in conflict with our statute, to approve it, or in violation of FHEO or whatever it may be. But the full flexibilities are there, and we really want you all to be creative. The reason we kind of fleshed out this list is we've heard that, it might be simpler just for agencies to get started using this prescribed list, but by no means is it exhaustive.
Okay, and can Lynn and Karen give us their contact information?
This is Karen, and I just sent it through the chat to all attendees, my email address and my phone number.
My email is jlwilliams@columbushousing.org.
We're seeing it different. And I will say, as I mentioned before, if you go on the MTW website, hub.gov/MTW, and I think click contact information, you will see Len and Karen's email addresses there as well. Thank you both. You might just get inundated.
Okay, and I'm seeing no additional questions.
Right. So with that, yeah, hopefully we know everyone's. I think we had 75 participants on the call. We expect 75 applications. But we really want to thank everyone for their really thoughtful questions and for dialing in. We encourage you to apply. If there are questions, specific to your agency that you want to talk about, let us know. We've also been, if your state FADA or NARO or group is having conferences and you'd like to hear more kind of from us directly, please let us know. And we've been going to a lot of those the past year. I see there was one more question that came in. Please say again where the operations notice can be found. If you go to HUD.gov/MTW, that's the MTW webpage, and if you scroll down, you'll see it was posted on October 11th. So if you look at that October 11th posting date, that has the operations notice, and you can click into that.
It's draft. It's not final.
And it's draft. It's not the final operations notice. And I really want to thank especially Karen Kreutzberg and Len Williams for joining us. You're hearing on the ground what's happening in Columbus and Boulder is, really valuable to us. And thanks for taking your time.
Thanks again for just inviting us.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you again. All right. Well, with that, I don't know if anyone has anything more, but we really thanks again, and we look forward to seeing some good applications.
All right. Thank you for joining today's conference. The session is now concluded, and you may disconnect.